We're sick and tired of this crap. Sid Vicious, channeling the thoughts of many upon many professional wrestling fans watching mainstream U.S. wrestling, whether on television or pay-per-view, throughout the early to mid-90s. Because me, oh my, down on the ever-dropping popularity bayou, shows like this remind me that it didn't always used to be better because whoo. I'm John Renton with the Retro View WCW Fall Brawl 1993. September 19th, 1993, we saw War Games, The Snatch Beyond. I actually don't think that that's what the tagline was, but you know what? Let's just move on from that. Whew! What a weird transition period for WCW in 1993. Honestly, 1993 was a rough year for WWF and WCW viewers. Not that they didn't have talent on their respective television programs. There were some great matches on pay-per-view. But Jesus Christ, both companies just kept shooting themselves in the proverbial foot to the point that their foot looked worse than Kerry Von Erich's after his motorcycle accident. But well before, you know what? I'm just going to move on from 1993 tragedies and stuff like that. The whole point is this pay-per-view had moments to remind you, man, WCW really did have a pretty damn good roster and people that were pretty good. And then there were some matches on this show that went forever and a day. That's never. But of course, we got to talk about some factoids. And by the way, the reason that I'm retro-viewing this, I've never actually retro-viewed WCW Fall Brawl 1993. I thought I had, and then I checked the channel catalog, and I'm like, oh no. Oh wait, it's on the WCW WWE Vault channel, so let's check that out. Why the hell not? So this was at the Astro Arena, aka the NRG Arena in Houston, Texas. Shrieking Paul Bosch noises from beyond the grave, because he died in 1989. 8,000 seating capacity. It opened up on Valentine's Day of 1974, and they had around 6,000 fans, and I am willing to bet that maybe half of those paid, because they just could not draw a fucking audience. 1993, part of the reason it was a rough year for WCW, little bit of history before I dive into some stuff about the various pay-per-views. Basically, in the beginning of 1993, Bill Watts was ousted from power by, February of 93. Jim Cornette's talked about this on his podcast. He was running Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He was going to maybe, trade some talent with them. He'd already gotten Bobby Eaton. Rest in peace, Bobby Eaton, who, by the way, lost to Eric fucking Watts in the dark match. Eric Watts. Yeah, Bill Watts deserved to lose his job for pushing his stupid out-of-touch son. Maybe out of touch is the wrong goddamn thing. He was out of his element. That's what I'm trying to goddamn say. It just did not fucking work at all. It's not that Eric wasn't a good athlete, but go watch any Eric Watts match. And then try to remember anything from it that was actually any good. By the way, I think it was Super Brawl 3 that had Eric Watts getting booed a ton. A fuck ton. A metric fuck ton. It was insane. So nevertheless, basically Bill Watts was ousted from power for things that he shouldn't have said. I mean, there's stuff about the Heyman lawsuit and everything, stuff like that, and I think you can put two and two together and realize what was probably said. But Bill Watts being ousted from power led to a change in management, and basically Eric Bischoff would eventually become the executive vice president of WCW. He was put in charge, essentially in a pretty big executive role, to cut costs, and one of the ways they did that was going to Disney MGM, doing the tapings, and they were marathon tapings. They could have a fresh audience every hour or so, and that was nice, and it did look glitzy and glamorous, and it was cool to see WCW well lit AF, as the kids used to say, because they couldn't really light any of the arenas they were running any of their house shows in, or any of their other television tapings, or a lot of their pay-per-views, because they couldn't draw a fucking audience. And any of the audiences they could draw, at times were interested, but often were just pretty goddamn down. Now, the WCW television tapings were universally panned. This is well before Nitro, but they would be taped like months in advance. It was like 2 months, I think, at a time, maybe 3 months. And they would tape them over the course of like a week or so or whatever it is. And they would have title changes that they couldn't refer to that were going to happen on pay-per-view, but then sometimes they didn't happen, and it just got all jumbled. And that would actually lead to issues with the NWA, because that would necessitate the change to the WCW International Heavyweight Championship. Because early in 93, we had, I believe Barry Windham was the NWA champion. I believe he beat the Great Muta, if I recall correctly. And Flair and him would have a match, and then they would end up kind of unifying the championship, but not really. Because that would lead to, of course, the NWA governing body that was a bunch of independent promoters and Dennis Corluzzo, who decided, well, let's just try to pretend, beat our chests and everything, and pretend that the NWA still fucking mattered as a governing body in the 90s. It barely mattered by like 1982, because outside of Kansas City, Sam Muchnick had retired, so that territory went down. Yes, you had the NWA traveling champion and everything, but that was mostly, besides Harley Race until about like late 83, and a brief win in 1984 to like boost business on a New Zealand Australian tour, it was Ric Flair. Yes, Dusty would get his little run, a couple little runs, but by the time we got to, 87, 88, Crockett was pretty much the NWA. And then you would have Ted Turner by WCW go through all this stuff. The NWA champion would still, be featured. It would still be referred to on WCW programming. And Ric Flair was still, to an extent, a traveling world champion. But he was just, by the time we got to 91, Jim Herd had pissed him off, all that stuff. He had gone to WWF. He had come back. February 93, I think he actually was a Super Brawl 3, but he had a non-compete clause where he could be on TV, but he couldn't compete in the ring, and I think the time he came back was June? I think it was June of 93. June, July, somewhere around that. And then he would beat Barry Windham, I believe, at Beach Blast 93. That would catch us up to when he would face Rick Rude later on in the show. And, of course, the International Heavyweight Championship thing is a timeline. It was all messy. I did a video on it like years ago. I think. I don't fully remember because I have done close to 6,000 videos since doing this. And that's including deleted stuff. Actually, it might be over that, not including the deleted stuff. Nevertheless, let's talk about the pay-per-view facts and figures. So this, again, 8,000, and look, they were not drawing more than maybe 100,000 pay-per-view buys, like maximum, until we got to Starrcade 1993. Fall Brawl 94, which had the worst War Games match in history after this one. You would have thought this one was bad. It was Dusty Rhodes, the Nasty Boys, and Dustin against Colonel Rob Parker's team. And Colonel Rob Parker allegedly shit himself. 115,000 buys, and they were at the Roanoke Civic Center, and they had 6,500 fans. We go to Fall Brawl 95. Vader had just left. It's funny that Vader was featured in the original Nitro intro, but was gone from the company after the fight with Paul Orndorff and all that. He was supposed to be part of Hogan's team. So it was Hogan, Savage, Sting, and Luger against the Dungeon of Doom. That was Earthquake, well, the Shark, Kevin Sullivan, Kamala, and I believe the Zodiac, a.k.a. Brother Bruda, a.k.a. the bloated piece of shit that he is. But they were at the Asheville Civic Center, 6,600 fans and 95,000 pay-per-view buys. So, not all that great in the following years. But, if you're averaging 100,000 pay-per-view buys, you have a base audience. But because of the Turner Home Entertainment stuff and because of how pay-per-view dollars were divided, WCW at times was getting shafted, and at times was shafting themselves. So we go to Super Brawl 3. They were once again at the Asheville Civic Center, and they had 6,500 fans and drew 95,000 pay-per-view buys, which is, I believe, a little more than they had been doing in 92. Even though 92 had some pretty good pay-per-views, they were at least a little more on the up. Slamboree 1993 at the Omni in Atlanta. They had 7,008 fans. Boy, those 8 fans just trickling in, getting us over 7,000. Hooray! And 100,000 pay-per-view buys. Not the worst in the world. And by the way, the Super Brawl 3 main event was the White Castle Fierce strap match. And Slamboree 93, I believe, was Vader and Davey Boy Smith. They couldn't call him the British Bulldog. Beach Blast 93 was at Mississippi Coast Coliseum. 8,600 fans, and they did have 100,000 pay-per-view buys. So, okay, so they're in that pocket of 100,000. That's not all that bad. Halloween Havoc, Lakefront Arena, New Orleans, Louisiana. 6,000 fans. I was after this, 100,000 pay-per-view buys. And I believe Beach Blast had Sting and Davey Boy Smith against the Masters of the Powerbomb, Vader and Sid. Halloween Havoc was Vader and Cactus Jack having their blow-off. It was a great match on a not-so-great show. And in Battle Bowl in Pensacola, Florida, 7,000 fans in the only WCW-labeled Battle Bowl pay-per-view. It did 55,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, granted, you had, because they weren't running pay-per-views every single month. They were still running the clashes. Super Brawl 3 was in February. Slamboree was in May. 3-month difference. Beach Blast was in July, I believe. July 18th and 19th, something like that. And then they would have a Clash of Champions. Then they would have Fall Brawl here in September. Then they would have a Halloween Havoc. Then they would have Battle Bowl. And then they would have Starrcade at Charlotte with 8,200 fans and 150,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, that was Flair and Vader. The Flair, comeback and everything, the big deal. I mean, Flair had been wrestling and wrestled on the show, but that was a big goddamn deal. It was also supposed to be Sid versus Vader, but then Sid decided to scissor arm in the wrong way. So let's move on from that, and let's talk about this pay-per-view after all the factoids and stuff like that. And I will put more factoids in on this whole thing. But yeah, school is back in session. The teachers are back in town, and then we get a goofy map of just showing goofy computer graphics of Houston, and we get displays of the card, championship matches and stuff like that. Shivani and Jesse Ventura welcome us. Jesse Ventura says, "I'm down here with all these Texicans." Is that actually a term that people use in Texas in an endearing way, or is it meant to be in an offensive way? I'm genuinely asking anybody from Texas to answer, because I'm not sure. So, Bischoff on the stage. He shoots to Michael Buffer. Somebody should have shot Michael Buffer with some personality, because I'm sorry. As a ring announcer, it's like Cody Rhodes doing ring announcing. You're welcome. So, Lord Steven Regal with Sir William, a.k.a. Bill Dundee. It will always blow my mind that that's Bill Dundee. The hair should have given it away, even with the bowler hat. But Ricky Steamboat was Regal's opponent. It was for the WCW TV Championship. Steamboat was the champion, and pretty much this was the highlight of the show. They started off hot, and then they tapered off from there. I'm not saying this was a 5-star classic, but at least it was well done. Steamboat had taped ribs, and they had good old lighting issues where they couldn't figure out how to turn the lights on correctly, and there were weird spotlight stuff, technical issues, I imagine. Because WCW always had technical problems because they had idiots running the goddamn production truck. So, hard chops. Steamboat was more aggressive, focused on the arm of Regal. Regal got a nice surfboard spot, ripped off the tape at one point, was targeting the ribs, but Regal was selling his arm. A tombstone spot by Ricky, that was pretty good. A crossbody, but he was hurt. Couldn't quite make the count in time, just got a 2 count. And then I was noticing, by the way, that the ring mat was the ring mat was starting to get a little bit scrunchy at this point, and definitely later. So Steamboat ends up skinning the cat, but gets hit with Sir Williams' umbrella and a German suplex. 1, 2, 3. Pretty good opener. Again, not a 5-star classic, but boy, best thing on the goddamn show by far. Bischoff's in with the Nasty Boys, and they vow to beat the tag champs in a certain way, and they have a nasty surprise. More on that later. Welcome, Charlie Norris. I do not believe I will do that, Gary Michael Capetta. Charlie Norris has since passed away, and I have nothing against him as a human being. But my God, he was terrible in the ring. Hey, Tatanka's working. Let's have this guy come in. Even though he is Native American, let's have him act like an even bigger goof. And I'm not saying he was a goof, but they had him overdo this fucking shit. And he took on Big Sky. Big Sky, by the way. Google Big Sky. Yeah, I know. You didn't expect it to be him, did you? Tyler Mane, a.k.a. Sabretooth from the X-Men 2000 movie. He was also Michael Myers in the Rob Zombie Halloween movies. They did introduce me to Scout Taylor Compton, so I will be forever grateful for those. Not for Rob Zombie playing in a stupid twat wife who can't act or do anything right. Fortunately, she was nowhere near this. We won Flair chance briefly. Yeah, this was bad. This was a TV match that they just put on pay-per-view. They had a loaded fucking roster. Take a look at the people that were under WCW's employment in 1993. Take a look. And then look at the people they decided to feature. And featuring young people isn't the worst thing in the world. But you probably should try to do a tag match. Yvette and Charlie Norris and Yvette and Big Sky or something like that. A Big Boot won it. I think Tyler did the right thing by going into acting. Not that he was terrible, but he probably was making a lot more money doing acting than he ever did doing wrestling. He trained with a few people. One briefly training with Stu Hart. Scott Dunlap, I don't know who that is. Apparently he was an interviewer, and he was interviewing British Bulldog. I'm not that familiar with Dunlap, but clearly they wanted to feature him and stuff like that. And bless Davey. I don't think Davey cared about being in WCW. Too Cold Scorpio and Marcus Alexander Bagwell. So Too Cold Scorpio and Bagwell trying to do things. Took on the Equalizer, who was always terrible, and Paul Orndorff. Rest in peace, Paul Orndorff. Special added match. Now, again, I know they were taping stuff out of sequence in, the Disney tapings and the Clash and stuff like that, and then they would do they did stop doing house shows for a bit, and I know the stuff would be jumbled. But you're telling me the fucking Equalizer was the best goddamn choice? Fuck. Too Cold Scorpio was good, and he shined here. He hit a 450 to get the victory. Bagwell made the right decision to turn heel, because as a face, he was terrible. Then a brief heel attack afterwards. The Equalizer, Evad, Dave Sullivan. No, really, they called him Evad. So, Bischoff was with Regal and Billiam Dundee. And in all honesty, it was cool to hear Bill Dundee talk. He was really just trying to, kind of get his accent, even out his accent a bit. He'd been in the country for a while, so I'm not saying it was super prominent. But an Australian man with a Brit, you might wonder about, why is this union happening? So Bill Dundee had to keep his accent kind of low. And Regal was so good and smooth, and I wish that he had gotten that chance to run with the WWE title, but he messed that up. I just feel really bad for the health issues that he's had. I'm just glad he's still here to tell his stories. So, we then get Ice Train versus Shanghai Pierce and Tex Slaginger. Slacking off. I wish, I was slacking off during this because I never liked any of these guys in WCW. I was 12 years old. Now, by the way, Tex and Shanghai would go on to be the Godwins, and the Godwins were okay for about 5 seconds. Ice Train, bless him, he did pass away. He was a big, beefy guy. And he was something smooth. He was something smooth. I forget the exact... I did retro review the entire last year of WCW. And man, why did they bring him back? Why? Just for what reason? Anyway, Ice Train won with a power slam. But God, he was rotten. And then he beat up both guys afterwards. And then the Nasty Boys introduced their new manager. It's Missy Hyatt. That fit, actually. Missy Hyatt looked great here. Not that Missy Hyatt looked bad before, but it fit well. And this guy, taking on Arn Anderson and Paul Roma, by the way, for the WCW Tag Titles. They had just won from the Hollywood Blondes, who were not on this show, by the way, because they were going to split up the Hollywood Blondes because, smart booking. But then a guy had a sign that said, Hey Missy with dollars for the S's. Did you buy those? I mean, funny, but damn. So, the Nasties got booed a lot. I mean, a lot. Jesse was making a lot of jokes and overtures towards Missy Hyatt. Missy got treated like she was being passed around like a joint at a college party. I'm not saying she was. I'm just saying the way they treated her on commentary. But Jesse even makes an offhanded comment about, like Missy's hair color. What do you think? Only your hairdresser knows for sure? My God! My God! Jesus! And Arn was feeling it here. Gross. I probably should have reworded that. This match went like 24 minutes and it felt like 40. I mean, there were parts that worked, but man, trying to have the Nasties wrestle in 1993, trying to have the Nasty Boys wrestle in general was never a good idea. But we kept getting, long sets of like, Arn and Roma getting beat down, and then they would make comebacks and whatever. And then eventually a splash got hit by Roma, but then Segs hit an elbow from the top and cover, 1, 2, 3, some new tag champs. And then the Nasty Boys, I believe, would go on to face Sting and... Was it Sting and Road Warrior Hawk at Starrcade 93 that went forever? I mean, literally went for fucking ever. More on the Road Warriors here in a minute. Jesse is then with Missy Hyatt and the Nasties. And Missy didn't want to make it about her. Wanted to make it about the Nasty Boys. So, lost in Queeflin clips. And Cactus is talking about how, he played tricks on Ray, or they showed how he played tricks on Race, and Race had taken Cactus Jack's sack. That's really hard to say. And then he attacked Vader. Jack, that is, not Race. As tough as Race was, even in 93, that would have been weird, because he was his manager. Cactus then was in an alleyway with a bunch of posters for the Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream. Look up what songs were on that. And if you don't know what songs are on that, you're probably too young to watch this video. Cactus Jack then had a special bounty match challenge. It's against Yoshi Kwan, a.k.a. Chris Champion. I want you to Google what Chris Champion looks like, and I want you to look at this Yoshi Kwan gimmick. And I want you to tell me what the fuck WCW is thinking. Whoever came up with that goddamn... Probably Ole, because he was still working there. And if Dusty came up with it... My God, whoever came up with that gimmick, Jesus Christ. Even when I was 12, I go, well, that guy's white. Anyway, the guy that had the Missy, did you buy those sign, also had a welcome Mean Gene sign, because Mean Gene was out the WWF door, and on his way to WCW. I want to say he was going to be there by Halloween Havoc 93. I mean, I retro-reviewed that, but it's been a while. Chris Champion was terrible. Absolutely terrible. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't wish ill upon him, but God, he was a terrible wrestler. And a bad miscue because Chris Champion was terrible and Harley could barely move. DDT 1, 2, 3. And then Cactus Jack got his sack back. Vader, you're next. And young Bill Goldberg looked with his hair that he still had and said, I could do something with that. Recaps of Rick Rude practically assaulting Fifi. While another alleged serial assaulter, Ric Flair, was right there. Ric Flair and Fifi would end up eventually getting together. And then Tony Schiavone said, and then Flair got it from behind. Well then, that's a rude awakening. So Rick Rude, competing, against Ric Flair for the International Championship. Already went through all that stuff and everything, but my God, this match, there were moments that really worked. Because Rick was an incredible worker at this point. Rick was also an incredible worker with a long, history. I'll let you decide which Rick I'm talking about. What I meant by the first one is Rick Rude was an incredible worker. Ric Flair, hell of a goddamn career by this point. And I actually saw recently, it was an Omni show from, I think, 83. 83, and maybe it was one from 84. Where Rick Rude, it had to have actually been 83 now that I think about it, because... Rick Rude was in Mid-South in 84. But Rick Rude was not very good at that point. Rick Rude got it because he got the charisma and stuff like that. I mean, he'll always look great. And it's just scary that Rick Rude would not even make it out of this decade. He would actually die, I believe, the same day the Columbine happened. If I remember right, it was either that day or it was right around that. So, this sounds great on paper. Rick Rude had Fifi on his tights, Rick and Fifi on the back. There were moments that worked in this, because both guys did work hard. But something seemed off. An early figure 4, Jesse made, what do you say about women that should be barefoot and pregnant? And his mic got cut off. Don't you cut off my mic. And then arm work on Rick Rude. And then a camel clutch for a while, a very long while, like an agonizing while. Ric Flair did hit a butterfly suplex, hit a rude awakening of his own, after a bear hug that lasted for 5 million years. And then Flair hit a dive to the floor, with a fist off the top, and then a fist drop by Rude later for 2. And then Rick tried to get the figure 4 on. Did. Fifi was, in the ring trying to, basically tell the referee, hey, wait, Rick's got something. Rick Rude, that is. And Rick Rude went into his tights, got a foreign object, and punched Rick. And then Rude punched Flair. God damn it, I really need to keep this a little simpler. And 1, 2, 3. So Rick Rude is the new international champion. And would be the international champion actually for a while, I believe. I don't think he lost that thing until he had to give it up. I don't believe so. If he did, it was not for very long. So, yeah, that was a match, and then we get War Games, the Snatch Beyond. We get War Games, the cage lowering, Gary Michael Capetta explaining the rules. Sting, Davey Boy Smith, Dustin Rhodes with taped ribs. A lot of taped rib action on this show. And the Shockmaster, who had made his debut, just over a month before, fell flat in his ass. Fell flat in his fucking ass. Ole Anderson losing it, trying to voice over the guy, and yeah. Poor Uncle Fred. Road Warrior Animal was their advisor. Road Warrior Animal had a back injury. He was working other dates and stuff like that, but he came in just as an advisor. He'd be out the door and Hawk would be back in, because this is when Hawk and Animal were on the outs. Because Hawk basically left him, was a dick about it. So, Sid Vicious, bless Sid Vicious, rest in peace Sid Vicious, Big Van Vader, and Harlem Heat, who were not Stevie Ray and Booker T, they were Kane and Cole. And Colonel Rob Parker was there. We did not see footage of Colonel Rob Parker leading 2 black men out on chains. That was actually something that was shot by Ole, or approved by Ole, and they never aired it. And probably because they would have been kicked off the fucking air. So, up to this point, the worst War Games match. And then we would get the Dusty Rhodes one, and actually, now that I think about it, the Hogan one against Dungeon and Doom is probably worse than this. And then we would actually get War Games. Really only the War Games 96 with Team NWO and Team WCW is any good. Because after the best War Games match, at least on pay-per-view, Sting's Squadron against the Dangerous Alliance, it was a steady and in some cases steep decline. So Dustin and Vader start off, and at least that was fine. Dustin bleeds at one point, but he has his boot off, so he shows you what's all a boot. We get some boot shots. And then bless Sid, he could never quite put it together. He just never could. He looked great, but there were just moments where it's he's confused. He doesn't want to hurt people, but man, there was lots of action pressing him up into the roof, because the roof is on fire. And the Shockmaster won with a bear hug. No, really, they gave the Shockmaster the fucking win. And it's just so funny that they brought him in as the Shockmaster, and by early 94, he is back in the WWF as Typhoon. It made no sense. This whole pay-per-view is terrible. It was just objectively terrible. There were moments that worked, but man, WCW was going to have to crawl out of the goddamn hole they dug themselves in. Even 94 was going to have its rough moments, but at least things got a little bit better. Until Starrcade 94, when Hogan wanted to have Brutus the Barber Beefcake in, his, in the main event. Why? But nevertheless, I reviewed that. So, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rentlin. Until we go to the match beyond again, happy trails to you.